If you're like most people, you don't think about the used car market very often. Only when you might want to sell your car or buy a new one does this market come across your radar. However, although we might not see it, used cars are a huge market, and at present, a very lucrative one too. So not surprisingly, it's seen advancements in digitization that is helping facilitate buying and selling, as well as taking what used to be a very localized market, typically a listing on Craigslist or something similar, and expanding it regionally and nationally. Hi, I'm Jane Singer, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to join me here on A Seat at the Table. It's really a pleasure to have your company, and I hope that you enjoy learning from the many industry leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and authors who are guests on the show. And like me, that you benefit from their expertise, experience, and insights. A Seat at the Table is now listened to in 92 countries, and it's great to know that we're able to bring together such a wonderful international community here on the show. Like so many industries these days, the used car business is enjoying the benefits of more sophisticated online marketplaces. Still, the process of buying and selling a car is not as smooth as it could be. Quinn Osha, founder of Topmarq, is changing that. His company focuses on improving the user experience for both buyers and sellers so that both can avoid those endless, pesky, back-and-forth phone calls and messages that are typically part of the sales process. In this podcast, Quinn shares what changes have taken place in automotive sales during the last 2 years, why car prices have surged, even for used cars, and how digitization is revolutionizing the car business for both dealers and individuals. Before we get started, if you're a fashion industry executive and are constantly feeling overwhelmed by the daily deluge of information and news, some of which is really just noise, if you know what I mean, then why not take a look at Inside Fashion's news briefings? You get concise executive summaries of top news and industry trends, so you can get up to date in only a few minutes. You can learn more at InsideFashionLive.net. That's InsideFashionLive.net. I'll put a link in the show notes and also on A Seat at the Table's website. Okay, now you might not be looking to sell your car, but what Quinn has to share is really interesting, even if, like me, you typically take the bus. I'm really excited to be talking to you today, Quinn, because it really isn't often that I get to learn about the automotive sales industry. So I'm ready and eager to jump in and hear what you're doing. I mean, I think we oftentimes take that industry for granted, right? It's always dealers here, and then you can look at different things online. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing with Topmarq.
Sure. So, I think Topmarq approaches the problem in sort of two separate ways. It's a marketplace, and our fundamental goal is to make selling your car easy and help people get the best price for their car. And so that's kind of on the consumer side. The sort of more complicated infrastructure supply chain aspect comes in how we try to facilitate sales to dealers. What we are essentially doing is taking a step out of the supply chain, the wholesale step out of the supply chain, and we're allowing dealers to essentially buy direct from consumer in kind of the opposite way of how like every other industry, went direct to consumer.
Right.
We're doing, dealer direct from consumer.
Oh, that's really interesting. So if you would walk me through exactly how that works.
Sure. So I think, examples are always helpful. So the typical workflow today would probably be if you have a Chevy truck, but you're thinking about buying a Ford truck. You might go to the Ford dealer, find the Ford truck you want, decide on a price for that. And then at the very end of the deal, you would say, okay, I've got this Chevy truck. What are you going to do? And then they'll give you some offer, whether it's good or not, who knows, but you'll have a little bit of leeway. And then that Ford dealer is most likely, unless they're a big partner dealership, they're going to take that Chevy truck and then they're going to send it to the wholesale market. And then a Chevy dealer is going to buy that Chevy truck. What we do is we basically connect the Chevy owner directly with the Chevy dealer. So they can go in, put their information about the Chevy truck, and then Chevy dealers all around the country can say, oh, I want that truck. And they're going to resell it so they can pay the most for it. And then they submit offers directly to our sellers.
Oh, that's interesting. And all of that goes through your platform.
Yeah, I mean, it really comes down to it's actually quite simple
Yeah.
to use, right? It really ends up looking a lot like a search engine or a kayak like experience for our sellers, in the same way that you would search for the best deals on hotel rooms. And for our dealers, it ends up looking very much like an auction platform, so they can see a list of vehicles that, are potentially going to be sold, and then they can make offers that they find that make sense for them.
So it's sort of like an eBay kind of a thing where you would list your car on there with all the specs. Dealers would then be the customer base, and they would go on there and look at all the different cars, and they would bid on the different cars that, and you'd see who was willing to pay you the most for your car.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, eBay is probably a good analogy. The only difference is that, it's much simpler. If you're selling your car to a dealer, they don't need tons of pictures. They don't need tons of information. Our
Right.
form takes about 2 minutes to fill out. It's basically like, does it have a bunch of dents? How's the paint? Some pretty basic questions. And then, on the dealer side, they can set up sort of automated purchasing sequences and stuff so they don't actually have to go through to just make things faster and easier.
Right, right. And then there's some kind of recourse, I suppose, for the dealer if the way you represented the car is not correct. Is there some process for them?
Yeah, so typically what happens is they'll submit a cash offer, and then the seller will go and do an on-site inspection just to confirm that, what was said is accurate. There is some variation there, but that tends to actually not be that big of an issue as long as you represent it within a reasonable boundary. It tends to be okay, because I mean, these dealers do kind of volume reconditioning and stuff, so
Oh, yeah.
they're not going to come up and get you for some sort of like, small thing on your windshield or whatnot. So.
Right, right. So this would be based then on local people who would be selling their cars to local dealers.
Local and online. So one of the cool things that we do that's, as far as we've seen not done before, is we actually support the other online dealers. So the big guys like Carvana, CarMax, Vroom, sort of the big names in the space. We also show what they offer. And so you can really get like a full lay of the land in terms of, what people are going to offer for your vehicle.
Oh, so that's interesting because I saw that on your site that it seemed to feature a car and then it featured all these different, I don't know if you call them channels or platforms with pricing under it so that you could see who was offering what for that particular car.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, automotive sales and buying has come a long way. And, I think Carvana has really pushed a lot of things online, which has been great. And so we're definitely not where we were 5, 10 years ago, but it's still, if you ask the average person, what's the first thing you're going to do if you want to sell your car? Most of them are kind of like, I don't really know. Like, do I go to CarMax? Do I, go online? Do I go to KBB? And so I don't think there's really a clear option in terms of like really figuring out what your options or what prices are available. And so that's kind of that niche that we're trying to fill. Is we want to be the first step. Like, okay, you've decided to sell your car, take 2 minutes, throw it on Topmark and see all of your options.
We're going to take a quick break now, and then we'll be right back.
We were hiring when we were making 50 to 100K monthly losses.
And why? Welcome to episode 1.
I can't think of a single founder who's been around for a decent amount of time in business who hasn't had their tunnel of year. This was that year. We're going to be okay, yeah, Sheree. Some are going to hear this and think, you TDP. But hear me out. You only have to do the math to understand that very soon we were $500,000 down.
Right, that's interesting. So really people can get a feeling for what they may or may not be able to get for their car and then determine whether or not this is the right time to sell or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, there's no pressure to sell, there's no commitment or anything. So it's just an interesting world, and where we now can get hard cash offers for used vehicles automatically, without bringing it in to the dealership. And that's something that is very new. And so we just leverage that power and sort of provide access to it to a wider number of dealers.
Yeah, I think that's great because it does, like you say, it gives both the seller and the dealer a wider market to choose from.
Yeah, exactly.
So when you're looking at this, what's the biggest challenge in doing this kind of a business?
I think there's, certainly a lot. Marketplaces are tough because you got two completely different groups of people that you're trying to build a base with.
Right.
Thankfully, we've done pretty well on the seller side. It's been really fun to watch and nice to see when I kind of explain the concept to people, their eyes kind of light up and they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And so I think for us specifically, a lot of the strategy lies in the dealers because while a lot of them want to change and they're very competitive and they always want to leg up, they are also very resistant to change and resistant to anything different. So I think kind of trying to educate and sort of change the mindset a little bit there from kind of the wholesale or do-it-yourself strategy to this new automated online channel is definitely something that we're working on now.
Right. So their resistance is really more a case of we always have done it a certain way. If it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing.
Yeah, and they're really busy, especially right now. They're making a lot of money because prices are so high. Everybody's running around. They're selling cars quickly. They're spending a lot of time trying to buy cars. And so it's hard to find time to look forward and strategize. And even though we can offer them time savings in acquiring cars and money saved in acquiring cars by avoiding that sort of supply chain step, it's difficult to factor that in when everything's already going well. So it's really just kind of us positioning ourselves in a very clear manner, and they do take numbers very, very strongly. So our goal is really to get kind of the sales pitch down to a financial dollar saved, time saved kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What's driving car prices so high right now?
Yeah, there's a whole swath of things, I would say. To start, basically last year, or man, maybe it's 2 years ago now. It's gone by so quickly. But at the beginning of the pandemic, basically rental car companies dumped all of their cars that were on their lots. So they basically had no cars to rent. Now demand's coming back. So they're just scooping up anything on the used vehicle market at prices much higher than the average person would pay because they're gonna rent it back out, right? So they've got higher margins than an average person. In addition to that, there's the whole chip shortage. So early on, it was just affecting the trucks, but now it has sort of expanded to other vehicles. So new vehicles are coming off the lots at a much, much slower pace than previously.
Right.
So they can't keep up with demand there. And so that new car demand is then rolling over into used car demand. And then just in general, people are moving from urban city centers to sort of rural areas with the work from home. And so demand for vehicles overall, if you can believe it, is actually going up. And so now you just have this like tornado of, not enough supply and more demand than we expected. And it's just, sending prices sky high.
Yeah, wow, incredible, right? It's interesting to see the impact that the pandemic has had on supply and demand in different industries. I mean, there's really been, a huge number of losers, but there's been a lot of people who benefited tremendously from this.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's an interesting market and something we may not or hopefully won't ever see again. But you can now, you can make more money on your used vehicle today than like they sell for new in some cases, and in some cases like tens of thousands more. And it's just it's kind of unreal, but it's an interesting thing to watch, especially for me, the semiconductor market, because I used to be in hardware manufacturing, tech company that built hardware. So we were constantly managing our pipeline of ICs. And that was difficult even back then, like 4 years ago. It was difficult to get enough ICs against Apple and NVIDIA and stuff. So there was huge competition there. And once everything shut down, it's interesting for me to see sort of how people are trying to cope with it now when you've got a much bigger pipeline issue.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, this whole supply chain snafu, so to speak, has thrown a lot of industries into a tailspin. So what prompted you to found Topmarq? I mean, how did you get into this business?
Yeah, so I mean, I spent several years in different facets of tech. Always knew I wanted to do my own thing, sort of go into entrepreneurship. And I've loved cars since I was young. I grew up around car auctions, played around with a few different cars, and it's just kind of, my passion. So it made sense to kind of mix the two. We started actually in virtual car shows, which went pretty well during the early pandemic, but there wasn't enough money in it to sort of sustain a real business. And so we started pivoting into this kind of marketplace space based on feedback we got from people we were talking to during the virtual car shows. And so it just sort of evolved out of really just my natural inclination to be in the industry and my background in tech. And we just sort of walked down a road until we found a real problem that we thought we could solve and then decided to solve it. It really wasn't just like this eureka thing that I woke up and was like, I'm going to solve this like very specific supply chain issue in the automotive space.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. You sort of evolved your way to this particular product. And I think that's great. That tends to be the way that you find a winner, right? As you stumble upon that one area where people need help, or where you can, like you say, save people money or save them time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, it was especially necessary because I jumped industries so aggressively. My former company invented the taser, and they sold body cameras, and they sold, software and services to police. And so, coming out of there, I probably could have come up with some very specific problems in that industry that we could solve. But one, I didn't really want to compete with the behemoth that was my, former company.
Right.
And it just wasn't my industry. I just didn't really want to be in it anymore. So, jumping into a new one, you're much less versed in, the day-to-day problems because I hadn't spent years in it. And so I knew that I had to put myself in it and just spend some time there, talk to people, and really feel out what was happening. And that's sort of what we did for the first, 6 to 8 months.
Interesting. Sometimes, like you say, coming into something when you haven't been entrenched in it, you're able to see things in a different way. I mean, part of it is you didn't know the industry, but on the other hand, a good side of it is that you weren't locked into we always do things this way and it has to be this way.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'm starting to appreciate that more and more. A lot of people have been generous enough with their time to let me sort of pick their brain, industry veterans and stuff. And it's interesting because it's, talking to them, it's almost like they're talking on a soundtrack. Like in some of these questions that I'll ask, like the way that they'll respond is just so consistent with one another. And that's just because historically that's how it's been.
Right.
And so it's cool to see that you can come in and kind of have a slightly different viewpoint and have that be something that's pretty unique.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, oftentimes that's how these big ideas come about. So speaking about big ideas, what's next for you? I mean, do you see yourselves evolving? Is it right now a matter of scaling, or do you see other services coming? I mean, where are you looking at if you're looking at sort of your roadmap?
Yeah, I think right now we're still in that phase where we're trying to improve the user experience on both sides. We want to make the process of selling your car effortless and pretty low pressure.
Right.
Even a lot of the online platforms that will buy your car, you put your information in and you get like 14 phone calls that day. That's not the experience we want you to have, no matter who you sell your car to. And so to some degree, our goal is to standardize the experience of selling your vehicle. No matter what dealer it ends up going to, we want you to have a good experience and for it to be pretty easy. So that's what we're really working on that side. And then on the dealer side, really building out sort of enterprise tools to quickly get people brought on and to just make it very clear and very easy to know what you're getting, and to make it easy to get vehicles. Because right now, like those 14 calls, somebody's doing that, right? And that's a dealer, and what they want is a car. But we think we can basically get them that vehicle without them having somebody call somebody 14 times. And so building out tools that sort of make that streamlined, I think can win on both sides.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you're cutting out, right, a lot of the sort of manual labor, redundant type of work in order to connect two sides much more seamlessly.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost like a customer service front for the average dealer, not front, software service, basically.
It sounds great. I mean, like I said, you don't think about everything that goes into selling a car. You sort of think about, I just, put an ad up somewhere, right? Whether it be on an ad board or in a local publication of some sort, and someone calls me to come around and look at it. And you really forget that whole dealer side of how do the dealers get all these used cars and how do they manage the inventory amongst themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's, especially in the past, like there's certainly private party where you sell it to another person, but generally, when people have sold their cars in the past, it's been like a second thought. I'm going to go buy a car. And then at the end of it, you're like, I also need to get rid of this car. Right. Which is weird because it's typically the second most valuable asset a person will have beyond their house. Right. So to put so little thought into selling your second most valuable asset is kind of an interesting experience. So we're definitely separating those two, and in that selling your car can be its own thing. And, typically you want to make the most for it. So. Yeah, it's true. Actually, it's a good point. You don't really think about your car as your second most valuable asset, right? You're not even thinking about it like that. And yet you're right. It is. I mean, especially with what cars cost these days. Yep. Definitely getting more expensive. So. Yeah. So one final question, Quinn, and that is, do you see this? I mean, right now it seems that a lot of these transactions are within a pretty regional or local market. Do you see this as something that will be scalable to nationwide kind of a service? Yeah, I think there's two sides of that. The pandemic has pushed a lot of buying and selling online, right, which previously was not. If you can believe it, before the pandemic, like only 5% of vehicles in the United States were sold online. Really? So there's maybe even less out of the 40 million used vehicles sold in the United States each year. So a tiny fraction of the whole. So there's a lot of room for growth there. Wow. Companies like Carvana and Vroom, which are 100%, online companies, they're growing at very large paces because people like the concept of just somebody coming to pick up their car. Right. In the same way that somebody comes and delivers their, food for dinner. So I think that trend is certainly going to grow, and they actually take advantage of arbitrage between regions. So if Carvana sees that Toyota Camrys are going up in price in San Francisco, they'll start buying Camrys from Houston, and then they'll know that it costs them all in, $150 to get a Camry from Houston to San Francisco. They can add that into their overall cost, and then they'll just start picking them up and shipping them over because they have that sort of infrastructure to do that, and they can do it very, very cheaply. Smaller companies don't have that. So I think to some degree, if anything, we're just getting better at arbitrage because the operations and logistics are getting optimized. But long term, I mean, there's always going to be local markets, and there's always going to be local dealers that want your vehicle, and they're going to have to compete with these big guys. That's just the way of the world. And so they'll either find a way to compete or, they won't, they'll go out of business. So, and there will always be people there. So we don't really care necessarily where the car goes, right? Like if the dealer buying it is going to ship it to California, or if they're going to keep it there, it makes no difference to us. I think we can long-term facilitate, some operations for them. But at the end of the day, we just want to connect sellers with buyers wherever they are. And from the seller's point of view, it will always be an easy experience. So some will offer pickup, they'll just come pick up straight from your driveway. Others, you may have to drop off somewhat locally, but there's never going to be an experience where the seller has to drive to California, right? That doesn't make sense.
Right.
We manage the seller side experience, and then what happens beyond that doesn't particularly matter for the sellers. And so that we can actually scale quite easily and quite quickly throughout the country. So that's kind of the cool part. Once you get these kind of gears working, that the expansion potential is really quite high.
Wow. I think it's really interesting to be able to take something, especially something as massive as a car, and be able to manage that inventory that seamlessly nationwide so that you have the right cars in the right place on this secondhand market where you don't really know what's coming into your inventory pipeline, as well as when you're going with new cars that are coming off an assembly line and you actually know what's being produced and what the timeline is. So I think that's incredible that you've been able to figure this out online. Really great.
Thank you. Yeah, well, so I think, just to give credit where credit is due, that's mostly the major players that are doing that operational kind of complexity stuff. We really just let them have access to the vehicles, because Carvana's and CarMax, that's what their forte is figuring out where their car should be. But, we definitely plug into the front of that, and it's definitely a cool thing to be a part of. So
that's great. Well, Quinn, I think a lot of people want to connect with you and learn more. How can they find you?
Yeah, well, if you're thinking about selling your car, you can go to topmarq.com, MARQ, not with a K. And then for me, you can find me on LinkedIn, Quinn Osha, or you can follow me on Twitter, Q_Osha.
Okay, well, I'm going to put those links in the show notes. And I want to thank you so much for being on the show. It's just been great. I've learned a lot about the automotive industry that I never even ever knew existed.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always love talking supply chain, and I appreciate somebody listening about the ins and outs of automotive with me.
Yeah, well, thank you. If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join me each week when I sit down with industry leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs, and authors who share their expertise, experience, and insights about succeeding in business and in life. And if you're an apparel industry executive who's constantly feeling overwhelmed by the daily deluge of information and news, much of which is just noise that's piling up in your inbox, why not take a look at Inside Fashion's news briefings? You get concise executive summaries of top news and industry trends, so you can keep up to date in only a few minutes. You can learn more at InsideFashionLive.net. That's InsideFashionLive.net. I'll also put a link in the show notes. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast.